My beginnings in magic. I was born September 22, 1959, at a Catholic mission in West Kasai in Congo. I am the fourth of a family of 10 children, and I became the oldest son after our eldest brother's death, 10 years later. In 1969, I was baptized at the parish of St. Bruno in Kananga, and with much zeal I was brought up in the Catholic doctrine. I was gentle and peaceful. I began to serve the Mass at church. Our parish priest enrolled us with children our own age in a movement called the Crusaders. This movement had for objectives the veneration of the cross and devoted self-sacrifice towards the parish and the community. After the Crusaders, I moved on to the Cairo and to the Scouts, and ended up being a zealous acolyte for the service of the Mass. Everyone spoke of my peaceful character in order to influence me into becoming a priest. My oldest brother died when I was in the 5th grade. This event provoked in me a strong feeling of revolt, because all the hope that my family had placed in my brother collapsed. Day by day I felt the desire for revenge grow within me because of my brother's death. This feeling grew much stronger as time passed. Without my parents' knowledge, I began to consult witch doctors and practice magic to earn a living and to unmask my brother's murderer. But all of my efforts brought me no satisfaction. Therefore I consulted a soothsayer and began to communicate with the dead while hiding in the restroom. But this did not allow me to discover the object of my search. It is in this manner that I opened up a door to the devil who laid a trap before me. I fell into it, because the devil had succeeded in planting inside of me one of his seeds of worry. From the moment I began to have contacts with the soothsayer, I began to practice deep meditations. Since I had begun at the elementary level of conversing with spirits in the restroom, I engaged myself further into the depths of Satan, driven by an insatiable desire. I made contact with a young man who lived near my home whose name was Ntumbudukup. He invoked the river mermaid, Mommy Water. His power enabled him to accomplish great marvels and miracles, and using his magical techniques he could produce banknotes, wristwatches, and all sorts of jewelry which he used for protection, love, business and many other matters. Although I looked into all these things and touched them with my hands, my heart was not appeased. I felt compelled to continue in my search until my thirst was quenched. Stagnant waters devour men. A proverb says, no one could accuse me of anything, because everyone would have testified favorably for me. This is why I exhort my brothers and sisters in the Lord to always judge by the Spirit, and not after the appearance. Then the mandate of the parish priest we had known expired. 2 more fathers succeeded him. I continued to be a diligent acolyte. Then we received another priest. He was of Italian origin, and related to a Catholic priest we had had several years before. Furthermore, he was one of Pope Paul VI's nephews. He became rapidly fascinated by my personality and became particularly interested in me. He liked to call me in order to talk with me about my life, my future plans, etc. He was a man of gigantic height, hospitable and good, but behind the imposing stature of this priest were hidden some very profound mysteries. One Sunday after the Mass, he made an appointment for me to meet him at his home after 7 p.m. I was delighted to be invited by our father priest, and did everything to be on time. I knew that our discussion would be about the parish's activities, but things took a different turn. That evening we ate together. Then he began to speak in these terms: out of all the young people of the parish I like you a lot. That's why I've called you to talk to you about important matters that will help shape your goals in life. But I have noticed that your life is in danger, and that's the reason why I called you here in order to warn you. Your big brother was murdered by 9 members of your family, all of them sorcerers, and now they are relentlessly pursuing you. Consequently, I want to protect you from their schemes. He listed their names. I was convinced of the truth of his words. I eagerly stared at the priest's tanned face. I had finally reached my goal. I was happy to discover what I was searching for, and at last I knew my brother's murderers. But now another problem arose. I was in mortal danger. What could I do to protect myself? That's the question I asked the priest. After a time of reflection he answered that it wasn't a serious problem, that he possessed all the necessary means to save me, but it was to be a matter of discretion. I swore to him my faithfulness and discretion. That very evening he gave me a little 10 by 6 centimeters cardboard image which represented a richly dressed young boy. An inscription underneath read, "Prayer to the Child Jesus of Prague." The other side featured a printed prayer in 3 sequences. I was to recite it every morning after awakening, and every evening before going to sleep, expressing the intention of being protected. This was to give me a guarantee of spiritual as well as physical protection. I accorded a very special consideration towards the priest. I saw in him a man who spoke with God. I was 12 years old when I was introduced into all of these mysteries, and in the 6th grade, several days later, the priest told me that I could use this prayer for my studies in the following way. I was to write down the names of all the students of my class and give them a grade of my choice. Then by reciting the prayer over the list thus established, I could set the students' grade order. When test results were given out, it was as if the teacher were reading from the paper I had written in advance. That is how I always obtained the grade level of my choice. Therefore I invite Christian parents to pray a lot for their children who go to school. Pray for them, for you do not know to which diabolical power they can be submitted to. Prayer is the greatest power on earth. I rejoiced greatly in this marvelous discovery which the priest called the only real form of magic. When I heard him pronounce the word magic, I desired to know more because I thought that it was God who acted thus in our favor. He told me simply to let him work so that I could discover the secret of an easy life. These are the bonds I found myself entangled in. I thought it was God who gave the only real form of magic, that it was He who revealed secrets, who gave success in all human enterprises, and who did it for free, because He loved the sons of men. My master knew of my worry for gaining more and more knowledge. One day he told me that we were to move on from the elementary level to the middle one. That same day he gave me a big book entitled Methodical Treatise of Practical Magic. This was an additional window into the mystical occultic world. This book contained many formulas and prayers to solve all types of everyday life problems, to hypnotize people, to trouble man's normal vision of things, and to accomplish certain little miracles such as transforming sand into sugar, sheets of paper into paper money, pieces of tree leaves into razor blades, making eggs, and different other things. I learned how to invoke different types of spirits who live on various stars and planets. Thus the moon is inhabited by spirits whose role is to arouse love. On Jupiter there are spirits of division whose role is to give illnesses, to sow division, or to supply warrior spirits to defend their protege. The spirits who live on the planet Mercury have the task of inducing lust, and exciting everything which pleases a man's eye. The spirits of the sun give different illnesses, notably dropsy, migraine headaches. Now that I was opening up to the world, I had to live my life according to the common expression used by the young people of my generation. But it is Jesus Christ who is the life. John 14:6. As for me, to live my life meant throwing myself into a life of dissipation. I used other prayers to seduce women. After having performed several magical operations, all I needed to do was to write a letter to the young woman of my choice. Whatever her past reticence might have been, she would always give in to my solicitations, because my letter had been written after having pronounced an occultic mystical invocation. On another occasion, I would also invoke one of the spirits who lived on the moon, in order to captivate the spirit of a young woman. Sometimes later, without having done anything else, the young woman would start looking for me. She had been manipulated by the spirits I had invoked upon her, to the point where she would fall into my power. To provoke divisions and divorces we were using spirits living on the planet Jupiter. When these spirits were sent into a home, they would provoke discord and they would push one of the spouses into becoming overtly stubborn to the point of divorce. Similarly, intimate friends could be driven to quarrel for the smallest pretext and then go on their separate ways. In order to have strength I would invoke the spirits living on Jupiter. At a crucial moment, I could send 10,000 spirits of this type to fight in my place. All I needed to do was to watch what was happening with my arms crossed, but for the spectators, it was I who was doing the fighting. This is the same phenomenon that is used by certain people for boxing matches, wrestling, karate, etc., everything that I have just described to you is just a small sample of the exercising of practical magic which I had learned in this book, The Special Prayer of Saint Charlemagne. First of all, it is striking to see in this title the word saint. No one ignores who was Charlemagne. He was an emperor, a man of war, who never served God in anything but who today is called saint. I will use this case to demonstrate that all of those whom the world calls saints are in reality just demons. According to the tradition, this prayer engraved on a stone was to have been found by the Emperor Charlemagne inside the tomb of Jesus. It supposedly gave him the victory over all of his adversaries. We used this prayer to ward off all diabolical influences, against fetishes, and it made us invulnerable. A copy of this prayer was hung in my father's living room, to protect the house and its occupants against any evil spell. I can recount here an event which has remained in the memory of my entire family. One day, a paternal uncle used his magical powers to cause lightning strike on our house, but no one was hurt. We attributed our survival to the protection the prayer that was given us. One must know that in our ethnic group, certain people are capable of causing such artificial lightning and thunderclap in order to kill people or to destroy their property. How I saved a friend. Near the beginning of the year 1972, I had a friend with whom I shared all of my sorrows and joys, except for the secret of my occultic powers. One day, the spirits told me that this friend had had a spell cast upon him and that his death had already been decided. Since I liked him a lot, I had compassion on him and asked the spirits if there were a way to save him. Anything was possible according to them, but in order to do that it was necessary for him to live through his death before he could be saved. I was asked to go out with him one Saturday night, in order to return home later in the evening. That day on the way home, we were to go through a small valley before returning to our house. While we were on the other side of the hill, we saw some people far off surrounding a corpse and weeping. When we came near, suddenly we realized that the lifeless body was my friend's, who was, however, alive by my side. Having seen this, he was seized with fright and turned to embrace me under the weight of emotion. At the same time, we saw on a nearby tree, an entirely naked man climbing the tree while leaning on his posterior. After careful examination, we recognized him to be the customary chief of our village. When he saw we had recognized him, he did not want to let us go. He laid a trap in order to take our lives by means of a demon who was waiting for us nearby. Since I was in perfect communication with my spirits, I was immediately warned of the danger we were in. I asked them for immediate protection. Then we saw a dwarf carrying a very big package on his head. We had just barely avoided him. It was this demon that was assigned by the village chief with the mission of destroying us. The package he was carrying contained the spirits of all the people who had been killed and sacrificed by the village sorcerers, and this demon who was a dwarf was the supreme chief of the witches of the village. My friend was very frightened by all these things we had seen, and it was not possible for him to sleep by himself. So I brought him home with me. I spent the entire night talking to the spirits in order to know the final stage of my friend's deliverance. In order to set the spirit of my friend free, I had to speak to a maternal cousin because it was he who cooked the flesh of sorcery victims. I had to ask him to return my friend's flesh. The next morning was a Sunday. At 6 p.m. I called my cousin again, this time with a different kind of determination. I ordered his spirit to fetch the cooking pot where my friend's flesh was being cooked. His spirit left while his body pretended to be sleeping. This spirit had to steal the pot. The sorcerer's gathering was taking place at a rock quarry. When the spirit of my cousin came back with the cooking pot, we saw in front of us a pot full of stew. I called my demons and they came to restore the flesh of my friend. As a result, my friend escaped death. In the beginning of the year 1973 started for me the most serious and deep events that were to mark my life as a magician, and led me to discover the mysterious world beyond. One Sunday after the Mass, the parish priest, my master of initiation, gave me a rendezvous at his home at 7 p.m. Faithful to the appointment, I came on time. He received me kindly and offered dinner. Then he told me the following: "I promise to show you greater things, and to establish you in life. Are you brave enough?" I answered affirmatively. Then he asked me if I would accompany him somewhere. Again I answered affirmatively. After these words, He told me that we were going to visit the cemetery. He commanded me not to look neither right nor left, nor behind me. Right afterwards he gave me a bell and took one for himself. We were to ring these bells all along the way. These are the bells which are used during the Catholic Mass, at the entrance of the cemetery. I stopped and he went before me. I was to enter before him, with orders to ring the bell at each step. We walked to the middle of the cemetery and there he asked me to kneel with him. He began to recite prayers. He was invoking the first person who had been buried in the cemetery. I listened to him courageously. Several instants later, we saw someone coming to answer him. He was the first man to be buried in this cemetery. He asked the priest why he had been called. The priest answered that he wanted to contact the invisible world, because he was accompanied by a visitor, in this case me. The spirit gave him his agreement, then began to invoke a superior demon called Boss Bombard. Suddenly, a big earthquake took place, and a very strong wind began to blow. In the face of these unusual events, I took fright. Having noticed it, he reassured me. Suddenly, a booming voice, deep and authoritarian, was heard, but it was difficult for me to localize it. This voice asked the priest, "Why are you bothering me?" He then answered that he had come with the youngster. Bombard addressed me by my name. "I don't know how knew my name," he said. "Bakajaka, why are you here?" Ignoring the reason of my presence at the cemetery, I mumbled that I had come to accompany the priest. He told me to wait, and was going to tell me what I was supposed to do. Then I heard the priest and the voice conversing in a language I didn't understand. Once this conversation had ended, Bombard said to me, "Bakajaka, we can see that inside of you there are many doubts, but in order to show you that serious things happen here, ask me what you want, and I will fulfill it immediately." My ardent desire had always been to avenge my big brother's death, so I said to him, "My big brother is buried in this cemetery. I want to see him and speak to him." The demon Bombard made me wait 1 minute. Then I saw with my very eyes my eldest brother, who had been dead for 4 years. He asked me the following question: "Why are you looking for me?" I answered him that I wanted to know more about the circumstances of his death. He said to me, "Since you've already made it up to this level, you are already an important man. It's not up to me to answer you, because you'll know more about it." With these words, he disappeared. Then the demon Bombard spoke to me again and said, "You are going to buy me 30 bottles of perfume, and you will bring them to me. Then you will no longer use practical magic, because from now on good things will be happening to you." He promised to reveal secrets to me which I didn't know. As we were leaving the cemetery, I asked the priest why we hadn't met anyone while going to the cemetery. He told me that he had removed all the passers-by by pronouncing the prayer just before our departure from home. Later on he came back with perfume. The priest prayed and did his invocations, and the same earthquake took place. Our invisible speaker came and asked us the motive of our presence. The priest said that I was here with the perfume. Bombard asked me to come forward a few steps and place the package on the ground. Bombard promised to choose a place in my room that would be a sort of mailbox where I would receive the correspondences that were addressed to me. He promised to send me a prayer book that I was to learn by heart for 3 months, as well as a magic chain and some magic powder. 2 days later, I found at the foot of my bed a letter written by Bombard, which informed me of my postal box number, P.O. Box 0/0045+, and my telephone number, 00110012. General direction, India. I was to send this letter back into the invisible world after having taken knowledge of its contents, because anyone who read it would have to die. This general direction was located at 102 Cemetery Road, in the invisible world. A week later at midnight while I was sleeping, I heard as if in a dream, something fall at the foot of my bed. I jumped and realized that the promised prayer book was there. This place was indeed the location of my magic postal box. The book's cover carried some very significant drawings. My name was printed at the top of the cover. Underneath was represented a closed coffin, in which was laid a corpse. A cross rose above the coffin, at the top of which a bird was perched. Underneath the coffin 14 little crosses were aligned horizontally. The coffin and the corpse signified that all my activities would be centralized from the cemetery, place where the dead are buried. The bird perched on the cross indicated that it was from the cemetery that we were to fly away to the invisible world. The book contained a series of 16 prayers which I would needed for my activities, such as to travel to the cemetery, to invoke the invisible world, to speak with the dead, to be successful in matters of love, to produce miracles, to make money, etc. I would have to do my best to memorize all these prayers during the 3 following months. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., I went to the priests to give my report. During our conversation, he told me that each time I read a phrase of these prayers, the inhabitants of the invisible world were alerted. Later, when we went to the cemetery, the priest encouraged me to pray. I recited the invocation in the book 12 times but without results. At the 13th time, I heard an earthquake and the strong wind blowing. Then our speaker ended up answering us. He said, "Bakajaka, why are you bothering me?" I answered him that I had come to show him that I had mastered the prayers well. He then asked me to recite all of them to him, from the first to the last. When I finished, he congratulated me, but formally forbade me to show the book to anyone who wasn't one of us, because anyone who simply looked at the book will had to die. He authorized me to invoke or to visit the cemetery at my own will, and to ask for anything I wanted, as the prayers indicated. He added, "Before I give you the authorization to use the prayers, you must be baptized." Therefore I left the place we were kneeling, and I went farther into the cemetery. There I noticed an old bottle of Johnny Walker whiskey filled with water. Bombard commanded me to wash my entire body in this water. I did it and noticed that the water never diminished in the bottle. The priest advised me to be very discreet. I had become a familiar of the cemetery. I could invoke anyone buried there and converse with them on any subject of my choice. I even ignored that I had already acquired great power, which made me invulnerable to witch doctors and their witchcraft. This privileged position had provoked hatred within my family circle. Those who had caused my brother's death were jealous of me. They looked for a way to get to me in order to hurt me, but they never had a chance. In 1976, the priest called me to inform me of the expiration of his term in Zaire. He said he didn't want to abandon me along the way. In his own words, therefore we were now to make a giant step so as to attain the final goal. However, I thought I had reached the summit of my powers, and I was surprised to find out I still had things to learn. I made an appointment with him to go to the cemetery at midnight. When we left at midnight, the priest took along a small rectangular carpet. Arriving at the cemetery, he invoked the first dead person to have been buried in this cemetery, for we were going to travel in the parallel dimension. After another invocation, the priest asked me to sit with him on the carpet. Immediately we left our body, which stayed at the cemetery, guarded under the care of the first buried person, and our spirit traveled to the invisible world. In a split second we landed in a very beautiful world that I had never seen in all of my life, and in a very beautiful city. We strolled along the wide, well-planned and embellished avenues. There were giant buildings with very refined decorations. We entered Cemetery Street, at number 102, and we found ourselves at the headquarters of the General Direction of Magic. We were received with pomp. I saw our interlocutors from the threshold of the building. I was surprised to see my photograph, in large dimension, displayed in the waiting room. Since I desired to know more, the priest told me the photo had been taken during our first visit to the cemetery. A moment later, we were ushered into an office where we found superior spirits that were chatting with us at the cemetery. I could see that they were brightening angels, I mean fallen angels. These were the angel or boss Bombard, who is responsible of the administration of all the external relations of the infernal world. There was also boss Madrag, who was a warrior angel and a judge in the kingdom of Satan, and whom one invoked in difficult situations, and who had the power to indispose, to give illnesses, to paralyze or kill, according to the situation at hand. And Miss Marie-Jeanne Brignet, a woman originally from India, who take care of finances. I became acquainted with these angels, as well as with the first person buried at the cemetery where I made my visits. He served as a sort of customs officer, in order to facilitate our access to the invisible world. After having met these fallen angels from the hereafter, I was introduced to people who live on the earth who had relations with the invisible, especially those who lived in Zaire. Then I was invited into the Great Hall of Gathering, where I found many historical personalities, some whose lives we had studied at school, scholars, scientists, inventors, great businessmen, political figures, and, finally, members of the Catholic clergy, cardinals, priests, etc. The day's session was organized so as to present me to the invisible world. I saw Pope Paul VI making his entrance. He was the one who directed the ceremonies. It goes without saying that the Pope was the representative of all the living people who attended the invisible world. He is the representative of Lucifer on the earth, and he held the supreme power. The Pope was still alive at the time. He pronounced a long speech, after which I was baptized Master to the 3rd degree, 16th power. The ceremony ended with a reception and a toast. But the wine was human blood. There was neither day nor night in this world, but there was an ambient atmosphere. After this first contact, the priest with the authorization of Bombard took me for a visit of this world with another individual. I made a sightseeing tour going in here, coming out there, in the midst of all of these sumptuous buildings and edifices. Then we stopped in front of a high fence, hermetically closed. Someone came to open and asked us to remain on the threshold. Inside the fence people were carrying heavy burdens. Some were suspended by a foot upside down. Others were being tortured. I asked what this was about. I was told these were people who had committed suicide on earth, and who had to endure punishment, because they had no right to take their own life. Further ahead this individual drew my attention to a place which had the form of a bottomless pit, so large and deep that I am unable to determine its breadth or dimensions. He told me that this was hell, but it wasn't open, for the time had not yet come. Since the time to return to the earth was drawing near, we came back to the angel Bombard to say goodbye. He asked me if I was hungry. Naturally, I was filled with wonder about the discovery of this new world. He gave me a biscuit, small and round, which I savored. Once eaten, this biscuit appeases the appetite for 3 days. All the formalities having been accomplished, we returned to Earth. I was surprised to find it was midnight when we arrived at the cemetery. In this invisible world there are no hours, like on Earth. I had spent about 30 minutes in that world. We had the custom of having in the invisible world on every Catholic holiday throughout the year, and upon convocation for every extraordinary session. With the help of my magic carpet, I could travel all over the earth of the living without any administrative formality, and thus have been able to travel all over the world. I promised to buy him a car in the days ahead. At these words, he took me for an adventurer. Later he asked me to move out of my father home and buy a piece of land. The site chosen for me was located in the neighborhood of the Hospital of Kananga, not far from the city's cemetery. This place was ideal for me to easily contact the invisible world or to visit the cemetery without hindrance. Since we lived in a traditional society, the attacks from the sorcerers continued. They did all they could to destabilize me. They even sought to take my life if it had been possible, but in vain. The position I held in relation to them was very preeminent. Unable to do anything against me, they went into the invisible world to accuse me. As for me, I was not informed of their scheme, but one day, I received a message inviting me to go into the invisible world at midnight. Quickly I went to alert the priest who, of his own initiative, decided to accompany me. It was midnight when we arrived in the invisible world. There, I was asked to wait for my accusers to appear before Judge Madrak. I was surprised, but the priest, my faithful companion, reassured me. A moment later, I saw 9 people file in, all members of my family and with whom I was perfectly acquainted. They sat not far from us. The judge asked us to go to the witness box. The first question was to determine whether we knew one another. The procedure was the same as that on the earth. Once this was done, they were asked why they had accused me. They answered together that they had noticed the very high position I occupied in relation to theirs, and that they feared I would cause them harm in the long run. Therefore they wanted to move first in order to eliminate me. The session was ended after their condemnation. Each one of them received a token on which a date had been inscribed. This date corresponded to that of its detainer's death. They returned to Earth confounded. I was informed that these sorcerers were going to use retaliation to avenge themselves, but that they wouldn't succeed. Once back on Earth, I noticed a change of attitude on each sorcerer's face. In order to know more, I attempted to visit one of them, who was a paternal uncle. He kicked me out like a dog. Those familiar with him didn't understand what was going, because I had been on good terms with him. This attitude repeated itself everywhere I went to visit these notorious sorcerers. They and I knew very well what it was about. While the neighbors asked themselves what was going on, the sorcerers' reaction was terrible. They sent me magical snakes, or dogs, to bite me. But they failed miserably. One day at 1 p.m., I was resting in my room. I was still living at my parents' home. I heard an unusual noise against the partition wall. I barely had the time to get up from bed when I saw a snake, entirely black, measuring 3 meters long, getting ready to bite me. I wanted to escape, but the snake lunged to block my way. I invoked the invisible world to distract the snake. After this was done, I left to alert my little brother so he could come kill the snake. When my brother approached, the snake stood guard just at the entrance of the house, ready to attack anyone who would dare enter in. My little brother first tried to throw rocks at him, but his sling broke. At that point, the snake prepared to flee, but I prevented it by the means of incessant incantations. Suddenly, one of the parishioners our parish arrived as if he was alerted. He succeeded in slaying this beast. This maneuver repeated itself several times, because it was a counterattack from the sorcerers, who sought either to rob me of my neck chain, or to have me bitten in order to eliminate me. But they failed utterly. After the snakes they tried to attack me with a dog, but this attempt again was a fiasco. They are all dead at this very day. The roll of jewelry. Since we didn't possess fraternal love, we went as far as making even those with little means to suffer. To do this, we went into jewelry stores to copy some of the models on display, and we would order these same models in the invisible world. During the night, we would replace the jeweler's models with ours. In the morning, these jewels from the invisible world would become suddenly much more attractive than the originals, even if the original had been noticed before. Anyone who bought these jewels and brought them home would attract all manner of problems to themselves, without knowing the reason why. When people buy these jewels, I would travel in the spirit to look to attack people that bought them. Wherever they were in people, they emitted a light similar to that of blinking headlights. I would then let myself into the houses where these jewels were, to observe the lifestyles of the inhabitants, and then cast an evil spell on them. Then illnesses would arise in these particular homes. There would be accidents, or problems which necessitated expenses that we profited from. Wearing jewelry is not a necessity for the children of God. The Bible speaks clearly on that manner in the following 2 passages. In like manner also, that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but, which is proper for women professing godliness, with good works. 1 Timothy 2:9-10. Do not let your beauty be that outward adoring of arranging the hair, of wearing gold, or of putting on fine apparel, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible ornament of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. Indiana, January 15, 1980. I discovered that I had been elected president of the parish committee. Everything was already arranged in advance in the invisible world, and the living merely concrete the choice. I open a parenthesis to say that the same thing is done to appoint bishops and cardinals, and to elect the pope. I celebrated the ordinary mass, as well as the circumstantial ones and even the ones for the dead. The parish experienced a considerable upswing during the entire duration of my presidency. The soccer team I had organized was invincible, because it was I who decided the outcome of the games in advance, and imposed the score I wanted. During a meeting in the invisible world, I asked Bombard to show me Jesus Christ. When I pronounced this name, I saw everybody kneel, and I remained puzzled, not understanding what was going on. After 5 minutes they got up, and Bombard formally forbade me to mention this name again, saying that here, they called him Old Papa. Since I insisted on seeing him, Bombard answered me that he lived very far away. but that I needed to know that he had placed them in the invisible world to serve the living. Several days later, he took me to a garden in the invisible world, where he showed me a crucified man, whose blood still flowed fresh. He told me this is the man I was looking for. Unfortunately, it was a lie. I discovered later on that this man on the cross is a demon. He is the one Catholics represent on their images and idols. In my desire to know everything, I asked Bombard again to show me the general director who presided all the activities of the general direction of the invisible world. A rendezvous was made for the Wednesday of the following week. Near midnight I went into the invisible world. We were suddenly surprised by a very strong earthquake, and we fell to our knees. The one who presented himself had a much greater stature than the angel Bombard. Having arrived to the place where we knelt, he stood before me and asked me why I was looking for him. I lifted my head to look at him, and I saw that he had 3 heads. Each head spoke in turn. I answered him that I first wanted to know him, and then I told him I wanted to be a multi-billionaire on the earth. He answered that first I had to be thankful for what he had already given me, and that at the age of 30 he would give me the riches I asked for. In closing, he asked me to offer him in sacrifice a goat who could no longer give birth, which I did. In reality, this general director of the invisible world had a name. He was commonly known as the General Founder Felix. He certainly is the founder, because the invisible world belongs to him completely, but in reality, he is Satan, who disguises himself under several different forms. I became already accustomed to be in the world of spirits, even the most powerful ones. I never ceased to ask what was their origin and whom they served. It was revealed to me that they were servants of the great master Lucifer. I thus sought an opportunity to meet him, but this opportunity didn't present itself. After having become acquainted with the sorcery organization, and always in my desire to know more, I asked Bombard to do everything to put me in contact with the devil. When I pronounced the word devil, the angel Bombard became angry against me and asked me why I called him this way. He continued to tell me that all of us were at his service. What a big surprise this was for me. He went on saying that the word devil was a derogatory name used by the inhabitants of the earth, and that I needed to know starting that day. That he was called somebody of the 2 hearts. Happy from this terrifying discovery, I then asked Bombard to put me in contact with him. He answered that he was too busy, and that it was practically impossible to meet him. Nevertheless, it was possible to attempt to contact his personal secretary and bodyguard, to find out if he could do something. Bombard thus gave me a prayer to invoke Nabam, who is Satan's bodyguard. He told me that Nabam was very dangerous for the living, which meant that I was to be very careful and watch that he wouldn't touch me when he would appear, otherwise I would to die on the spot. The invocation ceremony was to take place at midnight. It involved a whole set of preparations of which I won't mention the details, except to specify that I had to obtain, among other things, some holy water that is found in Catholic churches. I had to trace a circle around myself with lime, and a circle for Nabam, and I had to be alone in the house. Because Nabam would have taken with him the soul of anyone who would be found in the house at that particular time, I chose the date in order to make my wife and the rest of our household leave. They were happy because of all the money and gifts I gave them to offer to the relatives with whom they were going to spend the weekend. With the diabolical courage that animated me, I attempted the act. I respected all the rules of the invocation, and Nabam appeared to me in the midst of a tumultuous wind. I gave him some holy water to drink. Then he asked me this question: "Why did you call me?" I answered him that I needed to meet Satan. He formally forbade me to call him Satan, but rather somebody of the 2 hearts. He praised his master's power and proposed me some jewels, a chain necklace, a ring, etc., that would give me success in my enterprises under the condition that I never wear them in the churches where they invoked the Creator. I refused his offer, because the chain necklace I possessed could already be used without any conditions attached, and I insisted to see somebody of the 2 hearts. I wanted to go quickly to save time and to discover other things. He then made a rendezvous with me for 2 days later and sent me by correspondence the adequate invocation prayer. The day of the appointment at midnight, I invoked the Sovereign Master. In the room where I stood, called a sanctuary, I heard a very strong earthquake, accompanied by a very violent wind. so violent that I thought the trees outside had been uprooted. Suddenly, I saw a lizard appearing before me. As the wind continued to blow, the lizard grew bigger and bigger in the matter of seconds. When it reached the dimensions of a crocodile, it transformed itself into an upright being, whose body was covered with emerald-colored scales except for its hands and head. He had the appearance of a young man about 30 years old. He spoke first, asking me why I had called him. I answered him that I desired to be counted as one of the billionaires on Earth, and that I also wanted to meet him. He pretended to scratch himself and pulled from one of his scales a long list of human names, separated by a red line. He showed me this list, and I was surprised to see written there the names of all of my family members, the living on one side, and the dead on the other. He asked me to designate from among the living 5 persons that I was to sacrifice to him in order to obtain on the spot the riches I had asked for. For a few seconds I remained confounded, and then I asked him to give me some time to think about it, telling him that I would call him again to inform him of my decision. After a moment's hesitation, the devil told me that he lived under the Red Sea. In the twinkling of an eye he said goodbye and disappeared. I had hesitated, because since I was in occultism I had never been asked to make a human sacrifice. From that day onward, I never again invoked Lucifer in this manner, but I went to visit him at his home. We made a date, then we went to the Red Sea to meet him. Standing on the bank on the Saudi Arabian side we pronounced the invocation, an opening was made along the water and we entered through it. We were greeted by Nabam inside a building that was decorated with the most exquisite taste. Then the great master Lucifer came to welcome us. The first question he asked me was whether I had brought the 5 persons asked for. I excused myself and he accepted my excuses. Yet it is not his custom to accept an excuse from just anybody and for just any reason. He then revealed to me that he had already ruled the world physically for 3 times, under the shape or disguise of the popes, during the First and Second Crusades, and during the 100-Year War. It was Lucifer who had incarnated himself in the shape of popes. This explains itself, since a real servant of God cannot launch a war to kill people, inasmuch as there is the shedding of blood. I also learned that this general founder that I had seen with 3 heads was always Lucifer and disguised in another form. Furthermore, the Jesus represented on the cross by the Catholic Church is none other but Lucifer himself, master at the diabolical Trinity, having the emblem of 3 heads. He told me that he was doing everything to bring me closer to him. Because he loved me a lot, he authorized me to attend his meeting and to assist others in their macabre missions of killing people by the thousands, provoke accidents, destroy the churches where there was the beginning of revival, by sending evil spirits to discourage the faithful or to give them spiritual weakness, or by sending spirits of immorality, which is an efficient weapon to annihilate every true spiritual power. How many plundering and massacres have been accomplished by us? How many Christian groups and churches dispersed by all these practices? I was already excluded from the list of the children of God, because God said in the scripture, "And the person who turns after mediums and familiar spirits, to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people." I was hurling myself toward the abyss. I now knew that I was destined for hell, but Lucifer would tell us that we were going to get used to it. Lucifer would come and visit me at home during the day, in plain sight, but no one realized that he was the prince of this world. People believed that he was one of my fellow diamond dealers. We would go out to pick up women, and the fate that awaited them was death. After much suffering and curses in their life, many prostitutes, male or female, have thus had sexual relations with an evil spirit or with a great magician, who on the outside looked like decent people. I had received from Lucifer some magic eyeglasses through which I could detect any sorcerer or witch doctor, and determine the level of his power. These eyeglasses are not to be confused with the ordinary ones I now wear. Lucifer is determined to make many people sin in order to separate them from God's face and to enlarge his own ranks. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. That is why today there are many more people who have evil spirits within them, compared to the previous eras, because Lucifer has unleashed all of his power to seduce the world to a maximum, by using notably the desire for luxury, the seeking of beautiful clothing, and the lust for glory through all his disguises. Lucifer equally seduces people by superstition and the art of interpreting signs. He is also at the origin of idols, statues, medals, holy images, amulets, ropes, rings, and red cloth that is worn on the hips, in certain diabolical churches who yet brandish the Bible. Other churches use symbols, such as for example the sign S, which is supposed to represent the word salvation. Others do it in a more complicated manner, by entwining the S with a cross, or by using the sign of the swastika. Some shake hands in the form of a cross, others wear obligatory white clothing. In these churches of the devil you will find thousands of adepts ready to sacrifice everything in order to defend the interests of their group. Divination, astrology, yoga, Rosicrucianism, the Mahagari, psychoanalysis, telepathy have a direct relationship with magic, to accomplish supernatural things and miracles, and because of the ambition and avidity of men, the devil hides himself today under the learned names of research and science. There also exists a whole body of literature inspired by the devil. Reading any of these works leads directly to demon possession. Some of the titles are: The 5 Books of John, Rational Theology, The Book of Wisdom, The Magic Forces Within Us, Letters from Heaven, etc. The hour has come where God wants to remove all of our ignorance concerning the entire strategy of the devil. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The role of Catholic saints. Each saint in the Catholic repertory whom Rome uses to seduce the entire world, is not a saint in the real sense of the word. These are dead people of often doubtful origins and lifestyles who are venerated by Catholics. Many of them have been magicians or Rosicrucians serving the devil while living. The bodies of these saints are recovered after their death by occultic means. These bodies are then mummified, just as for the popes, and kept in the vaults of St. Peter's Basilica. When a new parish is opened somewhere, all of these spirits assemble together in the invisible world and draw lots to know which saint will be assigned to it. Once a name has been chosen, Lucifer orders the Pope to remove a piece of the body of this person. The part is then prepared by being enclosed in a white-colored stone which will be placed inside the new church's altar. From now on it is that particular demon who will patronize all of the activities of the parish where he has been assigned. We do not ignore that a demon is given the mission to harm man. He will strive to instill false doctrine into the adepts of this religion, and arouse them into always multiplying sin upon sin. This white-colored stone is normally featured underneath the drapery covering the altar. Before celebrating the Mass, every priest must kiss the stone. The aim of this kiss is to lead the assistants into believing without contesting everything that it will be told, by means of the magical powers invested inside the stone. This same stone is used to communicate the priest's wishes to the parish's patron, that is, the dead person whose body part is enclosed inside the stone. It is this spirit which brings the parishioners' spirits to submit to the will of the invisible world. God does not authorize us to communicate with the dead, nor to offer a cult to them. When people are led into this idolatrous act, they are constantly profaning the name of the Savior. Here is the biblical truth concerning this matter: He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are therefore greatly mistaken. God doesn't need the dead, even though they might be with him, to transmit his message to man. This is confirmed in Luke 16 verse 27-31, when the rich man asks the deceased Lazarus to return to warn his brothers. Abraham's answer is firm: God does not need the dead in order to speak to the living. I open a parenthesis to say that during the entire length of my ecclesiastical duties at the head of the St. Bruno parish, I discovered that the Mass itself is nothing else but an act of magic. I say this as a practicing member. In 1983, I decided, with the permission of Bombard, to leave the city of Kananga to definitely move to the capital, Kinshasa. This was accorded to me November 6, 1983, and I took leave of my brothers. The same night, I took my magic carpet and my luggage, and, by means of the cemetery, went to Kinshasa. I arrived there by the old cemetery of Delve. After a stay at the Okapi Hotel, I lived in Delve for 16 months before getting in touch with some brothers and acquaintances. While accomplishing my double ecclesiastical and magical mission, I participated in the Archbishop of Kinshasa's Jubilee September 22, 1984. I was filmed by his side during the inauguration of St. Joseph's Hospital in Limeade, wearing white glasses with black frames, and black pants with a beige jacket. My occultic activities intensified, but I had neither rest nor peace in my heart. Like all the others, I feared to receive an impossible mission, whose failure was always accompanied by the death sentence. The Marine Kingdom. All of those who were sentenced to death were brought under the earth to be exterminated. That is when I decided to go there to take a look, with the permission of the supreme authorities. In order to do this, I had to meet with the Queen of the Coast, who was to give me access to this marine world. I therefore went to Pointe-Noire, in the People's Republic of the Congo, to meet with the Queen of the Coast, on the shore of the Atlantic coast. There we penetrated underneath the ocean, visiting her offices and her servants. One must mention here that the Queen of the Coast comes to our cities in a physical form to seduce skirt chasers and kidnap them. Those who will have sexual relations with her will find themselves possessed, and will be cursed during their entire life. The seductive fashions which young women wear today always come from the Queen of the Coast. Underneath the earth, I discovered many more things. There were factories where people were busy creating models of beautiful cars or luxury equipment. When the models are ready, they bring them onto the earth, into the physical world, to be built. There was an electronics factory where televisions, radios and many other household appliances were made. I saw large, research and study rooms where great scientists and learned men, like Einstein, Archimedes, and others, were elaborating and perfecting their inventions and formulas. I also visited a building made up of 3 chambers. The Black Room, where victims are executed, the Intermediate Room, where the victim is put into a press to extract the water from its body. The water obtained this way transits through Lucifer and is sent to the Pope, who has it put into flasks. This is what is called holy water blessed by the Pope. The victim's body is then transferred to the drying room, where it is burned. The ashes will be added to those of Palm Sunday, and will be used to anoint the foreheads of the faithful on Ash Wednesday. I remained underneath the earth for 2 weeks, to familiarize myself with this environment. Then I regained the earth. I never left the company of Lucifer. We would go out together in big Mercedes, which weren't really normal cars but coffin. We would visit all the high-class places of Kinshasa, such as the Hotel Intercontinental. There, we would seduce and sleep with women who were to die several months later at the entrance of bars. Lucifer places naked goddesses to put a spell on those who come to drink. The unification of churches and worldwide political power. On May 25, 1985, Pope John Paul sent out an invitation to all the important people of the world, including those who call themselves evangelical but who work only for their own interests. The place chosen for this meeting was Nairobi in Kenya, and 800,000 people came together on this occasion of the Pope's visit. The work to be done had to do with the unification of the churches and the unification of the political world under the authority of the Pope. During one of the meetings personally presided over by the Pope on June 1, 1985, it was decided to delete from the Bible the following portions of scripture already mentioned. Soon afterward, it was even decided to publish a new Bible that would not carry these portions, and which would be called Jerusalem. The Pope, aided by the powers of this world, will strengthen his throne to make himself to be worshipped like God. And the false prophet of the false peace will do everything to convince the entire world to align itself behind the Pope. 1. The Pope is in the process of persuading all the heads of state of the entire world to adopt a policy that is conform to his projects. Thanks to its riches, the Vatican will succeed in imposing its will over all the poor and over every country whose economy is in difficulty. The application of the mark of the beast will be done in 2 manners. The first mark will be spiritual, through the total corruption of morals and the abandonment of the path of truth. This corresponds to 18 qualifications, that can be regrouped into 3 series of 6, forming the number 666, and that are enumerated in 2 Timothy 3, 2-4. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. 6. Unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control. 6. Brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. 6. The other mark will be physical, either by a seal, either by a mark worn on the body, and which will allow those who belong to the beast to be identified. If a child of God finds himself in one of these above-mentioned qualifications, he must repent and pray with all his heart that God deliver him, because this spiritual mark will bring upon him the physical mark, from which one will not be able to escape. Since the spiritual mark is already present, the poor in spirit are the only detainers of the Holy Spirit, without anything added. The Antichrist and the Mark of the Beast. On August 29, 1985, under the authority of the Pope, 16 articles were written which justify the events predicted in Revelation 13 verse 16. Because I personally took part in the meeting which prepared for the publishing of these articles, I will give you now the translation of the list of these 16 articles, taken from the minutes of this meeting, signed by Pope John Paul II. Article 1. No one will be able to send a letter by mail without the mark. Article 2. No one will be hired by a company without the mark. Article 3. No child will be able to study if his parents do not have the mark. Article 4. All armaments will be placed under the authority of a unique worldwide organization, and no one will be able to buy or sell them without the mark. Article 5. No one will be able to buy nor sell food products, nor be a farmer, without this mark. Article 6. No one will be able to make bank transactions without this mark. Article 7. If someone doesn't accept or goes against these articles, he will be severely punished, even up to the death penalty. Article 8. No one will be able to travel without having this mark. Article 9. All space exploration vessels will be placed under the authority of this worldwide organization. Article 10. No one will be able to import or export anything without having this mark. Article 11. There will a unique currency, universally employed. Article 12. There will be a unique church, and all the members of this worldwide church will worship on the same day, Sunday. Article 13. Poverty and destitution will be eliminated. The standard of living in developing nations will be improved. Article 14. No one will be able to hunt or fish without this mark. Article 15. Every transportation company worldwide will be particularly well treated. Article 16. No one will be able to receive hospital care without having this mark. Sometime later, near the end of 1984, I noticed that if I asked for a certain amount of money, the invisible world would send me only the tenth of my request. This situation upset me, because I didn't understand the reason why. That's when I decided to return to Kananga, to check out on the spot what was going on. But the opportunity to travel didn't present itself. First of all, the carpet I used to travel on was taken away from me, and I didn't have enough money to leave. My special telephone disappeared also, and I had nothing left to communicate with except for my prayers and my chain necklace. At the beginning of August, 1985, I visited a cousin. His wife asked me to accompany her to a prayer meeting. I placed the cross of my chain necklace into my mouth to ask for Bombard's permission. He forbade me to go. I then made up an excuse and escaped, pretending to be in a big hurry, but I promised to accompany her another time. A week later, I went by there again, and my cousin's wife renewed her invitation. I refused once more. After passing by there yet another time, she insisted again. That day when I called Bombard he didn't answer me. I decided to go with her. It was 6 p.m. when we arrived together at the church. We found some young waiting for the meeting to start while reading their Bibles silently. Being sorry to find myself in such an environment, I reproached my cousin's wife to have ridiculed me by bringing me into the midst of these profane people. I remained near the entrance of the compound, and I began to spiritually probe the environment in which I found myself, but I was unable to get in contact with the invisible world in order to situate myself. At 5:00 p.m., everything started. It was hymns, intercessions. I obstinately continued to try to understand what exactly was going on, but in vain. While they were interceding, I stretched out my astral hand, I mean the hand of my spiritual body, to block their prayers. I then felt a powerful fire burning me. Every one of my attempts failed, and I continued to watch them at work. Once the intercessions were over, the assistance was asked to wait for prophecy. Immediately afterwards, a brother began to prophesy and it was aimed directly at me. Here is what this prophecy said. Our brother who is near the door is very beloved of the Lord. The Lord wants to put him at his service, but he is asking him to do one thing. He must turn to him and give up all of his magical practices. He will lose all the goods he has acquired through magic, but the Lord will walk with him. He told me that I was carrying a briefcase with holes, which meant that I was going to lose everything I had acquired through magic. Then, he said that he saw a plate turning before me, which meant that God would establish me into a peaceful life, if I would give myself to him, and that he would take me into his service. You can imagine my surprise when I heard this young man give out the details of my life, while my own brothers and sisters here in Kinshasa didn't know who I really was. I was thoroughly convinced of the truth of this prophecy, but, inside me, I doubted very much as to the prophecy's orthodoxy. I became irritated against this brother, and waited until nightfall to come and sift him as wheat. After the meeting, a servant of God came to exhort me, but thanks to my occultic powers I detected that he wasn't pure for God, so I made a prayer to distract him. As a result he then began to talk nonsense. That is why God's servants must be holy and prepared. Starting a day later, all of my clothing disappeared, because they all came from the invisible world of darkness. The same thing happened to my priest's robes. The 3 suitcases full of money from which I supplied myself also disappeared one after the other. Then my automobiles broke down. What a mess I got into. From now on I had no more contact with the invisible world, although I still had my magical chain necklace, my magic powder and my prayer booklet. One day at 4 p.m., I was alone and busy sketching the organization chart of the company I wanted to start with the invisible world. Not knowing that things has taken a different turn, I heard a voice calling me, but I was unable to locate it. I thought it was a dream or a misunderstanding, and I continued my work. Later, around 2 a.m. I heard a voice calling me. I jumped, thinking that it was Bombard, and I went to the restroom in order to talk to him, but no one was there. This happened twice in a row, so I decided not to answer anymore. This same voice was heard 30 minutes later. When I listened to it attentively, I wasn't Bombard's voice. This voice was melodious and full of compassion. It asked me to abandon what was still left. I asked him who he was, and he answered me, "I am your Lord Jesus Christ. It is I, Jesus, who is calling you to me." It was for me something incredible to talk with Jesus Christ. Where could I start? But it was an undeniable reality. It was a reality more profound than the occultic world I knew. I had never heard anyone say that Jesus spoke to humans since he had gone to heaven. That night I was tormented, trying to understand but without success. I invoked Bombard, but I could no longer enter into contact with him. I felt anguished, but it was dispelled in a way I knew not how. During my next meeting with my sister, she indicated to me the address of the church. I went by to verify the information, and I found people in the midst of prayer, but I returned home. The next day I went in there of my own accord. The word of God that was preached that day touched my heart. This word, preached by a brother, described the manner Elijah had arranged the altar and invoked the Lord to consume the sacrifice. After that I persevered in prayer, and in October 1985, I received a letter from my little brother from Kananga telling me that my compound near the hospital had been confiscated by a would-be buyer, and inviting me to return to Kananga to solve the problem. I understood that it was still the first prophecy that was being accomplished. Then, it was my magic eyeglasses that disappeared. During a service on repentance that was held at the church, I thought it useless to keep the objects that remained, and with sincerity I surrendered to one of my brothers my chain necklace and my prayer booklet, and this was my breaking off with magic.